Doorlu nuttaanata. Katamani. Yugiama alamchigia. Silam masperok. Silam maariga. Kilahtak. Juyaya. Imachpik. Lammio chikirayan. Imachpik mi. Kuichor mishu. Payuhtalara. Slavut manni. Slavut khani. Arayuli yarahut. Shammia quyanaqfa. Shammia quyana. Jaknak. Kunachtish. Hawa. Silam mani khwani. Respect. Chikikulu. Chikikulu. Kankutayu. Tamach. Nasuyari maitaka. Nasuyari maitaka. Chikwa. Chakwa. Kunach. Chish. Kuyan fa. Ariga. Doi.
Hi everybody, my name is Bernie Worrell. My gift is from God. And I was born with perfect pitch also, so I can play anything I hear, I can play. And I had the gift of being able to mix music. This is what I do, been doing my whole life. Classically trained, played in church. He mentioned his project and how he would like to merge. He didn't know if it was possible, but how he'd like to merge funk with Native American music. So I said, he asked me what I thought. I said, sure. But I believe everything is related. Musics are related. Just have to work it out.
Bernie, his phrase is woo, and he's referred to as the Wizard of Woo, and kind of that's the term he uses. I still refer to Bernie in the present tense, he's still around. That's his musical outlook, how he wants to bring people together through music, and that's how his really outlook on music was, and communicating with people, and giving people strength and uplifting people. And the Tlingit word "WOOch" also has to do with the people being together, and it was together. Yeah, and we kind of were like, wow, those words totally intersect with each other, and they both have this commonality of a shared meaning. So that was, as soon as we found that as being, like a happy coincidence or more than a coincidence, you're like, wow, that totally fits what this record is about. Because a lot of the thematic material, has to do with human relationships with each other and how we interact with each other, and relationships are so important and define who we are as people. And yeah, it was again one of those things where it's like the work reveals itself to you once you get to the end of it, and it wasn't like a conscious thing at all. It just, you get to the end and you look at all the pieces and you're like, wow, there's a unifying concept here.
For me, I discovered Bernie mostly, initially through the Talking Heads. So I remember seeing the Talking Heads, their Remain in Light tour, or the Speaking in Tongues tour. and I saw that movie too, that Stop Making Sense, and he's really heavily featured on that film, and I was just like, God, this guy is just audacious, and he has a way of like how he plays his instruments or his keyboards. Like, he has a way of just hanging a note out in space and not taking up a lot of room with it, but he just, and it's like, and you notice it. So he's not getting in people's ways, but he's adding to it in such a unique way. I don't know any other keyboard player who does that. And so sometimes when he'd would be doing a solo and they'd be focusing in on him, I was just fascinated and captivated with his presence. And so then kind of retroactively I started going back and getting in. I mean, I grew up listening to Earth, Wind and Fire and Ohio Players and all this funk stuff, that funk soul, and but I never really hit on Parliament Funkadelic. And so then after that, I like to go down the rabbit hole when I find a musician that I like, and then all of a sudden I started getting all of Bernie's, like, his solo albums. So I was pretty much had in every album that he ever made by the time I got to meet him, and really had gone through the entire discography of like Parliament Funkadelic and anything else, the whole Bill Laswell era and all of the different work he'd done with like African musicians and all kinds of stuff. So I mean, I was like, anything I could find, I was like, I gotta get it. I gotta listen to this, and I gotta get it in my in my head.
I remember the day I learned Bernie Worrell's name. I was in junior high school in the late 80s, and that was the era when people started to sample P-Funk and hip-hop. And that was like the fresh music of the day. It was like, that was like the heyday of like Public Enemy, like X-Clan, and everybody that was heavily sampling that. I remember I was in 7th grade, and one of my buddies brought in, I think it was Rap Pages magazine, and it had an article in it about P-Funk and a list of who was sampling all these P-Funk songs. So I knew, like Me, Myself, and I, by De La Soul, and I knew all these samples that were in the music that were awesome, and I had no idea who they were coming from. And that in 7th grade, that article outlined it, and it had the list where it's like Me, Myself, and I sampled Not Just Knee Deep. And this song sampled, like, this X-Clan song sampled Flashlight, and Digital Underground sampled like Theme from the Black Hole on this, stuff like that, where it had like this full page list. And I was like, oh snap, all this music I like is coming from that. And that article listed Bernie Worrell and Eddie Hazel and Gary Scheider and Junie Morrison, Bootsy, all these people who had names I'd never heard before. So that, like, I stole the magazine. Or no, I ripped out the pages that had that chapter in it. And then that was like my template going to the record store. And I would try to find everything on that list, and just every weekend, like, okay. And that was when a lot of that stuff was out of print, so you couldn't like go into like the Fred Meyer record store or Sam Goody and find any P-Funk stuff in print. Maybe you could find like the most recent George Clinton solo tape, but you couldn't find like America Eats Its Young and Uncle Jam Wants You or any of that stuff. And so then all of a sudden, because everybody was sampling it, then all of a sudden it came back into print, and then you could find almost, not quite everything, but almost everything. So then all of a sudden I was able to get my hands on copies of it, and just from there and that was like like 11 when I was starting to play guitar. So all this like P-Funk coming in was right as I was learning to play guitar. And Bernie's stuff he was doing on all those records was so awesome that it was like, oh, I want to learn how to do that too. And I was starting to dink around on keyboards and stuff. And so I was trying to learn every part that everybody was doing on any given P-Funk album. And then it just steamrolled, and I was like more and more obsessed with it. And then Bernie, because I think out of everybody in the P-Funk camp, Bernie stayed the most relevant in contemporary times more than anybody else.
A thing about Bernie that I was like to point out, and I spoke about this with one of the, the Bernie Worrell Orchestra. He said he learned so much about how these pedals and things would morph his keyboard sound. So he was very much about, and that's why he pioneered so many new sounds in the music, because he would use it in such a unique way. Not the most obvious way, but sometimes you would take like a phase shifter and an envelope filter that would just kind of like take it, and if he played like really percussively, it would change the timbre of the chords that he was playing, and it just nobody plays like that. He was really kind of a master at like playing with different sounds and how he'd shape the sounds with different pedals and things.
Things about playing with Bernie was that he liked to interact, like in terms of like solos, like interacting with another soloist that was doing like call and response type stuff. That was always fun because you never know like what's going to happen at any given time. Like Skerik would play a line and then Bernie would echo it exactly, and then they'd start kind of do like dueling banjos, except it's a sax and a Rhodes.
Yep.
And then it was like I love like throwing, because I'm such a P-Funk nerd, that I would like throwing like find like an Eddie Hazel part off of one of like the early Funkadelic records, and then throwing it at him in the middle of a song to see if he could catch it. Because if he caught it, he would crack up and start laughing, and making Bernie laugh was always awesome. So
right,
I started doing that, like all right, let's see if he's gonna catch this one. And then and every now and then I could make him mess up a little bit because he'd be laughing because he'd catch something, but then he would start turning that back at me, seeing if I would catch stuff, and then and that would throw me off. Like there was that one time where we were doing like Flashlight and he kicked it into Not Just Knee Deep, and I was just not ready, and I just bungled it up terribly. But I was like, yeah, because he's the master.
right.
So.
Yeah, no, there was so much joy that he had when he was performing. It doesn't matter, if it was, however many people were in the audience, he would just his enthusiasm was just infectious. He would keep everybody like with a big grin on their face, the whole time. And he'd be looking at you, making eye contact, and you'd do something and he'd crack up, and then you'd be like, you'd start laughing too, and then, it was just like that.
he is the creator of circles, he brings everyone together, and whether you're on stage with him or in the audience, and it's just so great, so joyful and great.
When we got to the third album, Stanton started having scheduling conflicts. So we had the studio time booked, and it happened to fall in a period where Stanton wasn't available. So that's Randall suggested that we use a drummer he knew named Steven Nister, who I had never heard of before, but I was familiar with stuff that he played on because he's done some stuff on like some Gnarls Barkley stuff, like some Danger Mouse productions. He's Brian Blade's drummer when Brian Blade does a project where he's not playing drums. He's played with like Brandi Carlile. Most recently, he's playing with Sparks, and he's from Michigan, which is another like Michigan connection. So Michigan is a cool, relevant place in that, I think Randall's from out there, Stevie's from out there. Michigan was like kind of the P-Funk hub in a lot of ways, like when the guys moved from Plainfield out to Detroit, Michigan became a funk hub in a lot of ways. So having another Michigan person in there was cool. But his drumming is really different than Stanton's. Stanton is very much like the New Orleans style. In a lot of ways, Stanton is like four drummers at once. There's times where he sounds like a second line drum group where there's like one guy playing one part on the kick, and there's a snare drummer, and there's some other people doing other percussion stuff. Stanton's like an octopus. He'll sound like a bunch of people at the same time, and you have no idea how someone can juggle that many parts. And also a very busy drummer. Like there's a lot going on in Stanton's part where there's a lot of 16th notes are very present in Stanton's drum arrangements. Stevie is much more, is a northern guy versus a southeastern drummer, so you got that vibe different. He studied under Bob Moses, which another Jim Pepper connection. Bob Moses was in the Free Spirits with Jim Pepper and Larry Coryell, and were one of the first jazz rock bands ever. Bob Moses became a jazz educator, and Stevie studied under him. So there's a lot of like Bob Moses elements. Has a very different funk approach than Stanton does, and very much more spacious drum style where there's not as much going on at the 16th note level, which opens up a lot more space to where you hear other things going on when there's not like a steady stream of 16th notes. So very different approach. And so you can kind of hear the difference between the first two records, which are the Stanton records, and Heen and WOOch, which are the Stevie Nister records. Stevie's also Buddhist, and has a very spiritual based element to how he plays. So the vibe of the two later records are really different, just having that drummer change and very different drum tone, in the drums that they're using. So yeah, it was cool to have another, person come into the fold, and, we haven't really had a stagnant lineup where it's like, the whole line has had the same people in it, which is cool. Cause again, it's like, you don't want to make the same record over and over again. So, there was a vibe change along with that. And then after those projects, that's when Stevie went on to playing with Sparks and touring the world with those guys. And very cool guy, still in contact with him. He's still based out over in Michigan. So he came in and did those two records with us. And then after that, that's later where the great Ed Littlefield came in and joined the family after that.
when her children grew too old to need her. Her husband ran off with a bottle of wine. The Indian Center had nothing more to offer. The city streets grew dark, cold, and full of lies. She looked into the mirror, her eyes were hollow, no spirit. So she had a giveaway of all her things. The poor neighbors thought she had gone mad. They took her things anyways, after all, they were poor too. She drove her 1964 rusted Chevy as far as it would take her. She got out screaming, running, tearing off her clothes. When she spoke, she was lying on the hilltop. Her shadow waited patiently for her to rise. 4 women came singing, bearing gifts, like flickering bright candles in the night. East woman gave her a piece of the sun. South woman opened her mouth. Her song spilled into the universe. West woman gave her 4 horses. North woman a bear claw in her robe. When she stood, the people began to rise. Where she walked, the people began to follow. Everywhere she stepped, medicine grew. She heard her children calling, coming home. She knew how to purify water. She knew how to suck the poison from one's mind. Every thought she had was good. Everything she thought came true. The people started speaking their own language. Birch bark scrolls rolled out from under the rocks. Everywhere the children were laughing. Grandma had someone to tell stories to. The young woman stayed up all night dancing, and the young men were aware of their power. The trees, the wind started to whisper. Thunderbirds were dancing in the sky. Moose came running through the meadows, fish rushed through the streams. She built her fire from flint and cedar. Its smoke leaving clouds of medicine in the air. Sickness packed its bags and left the people. Buildings crumbled back into the earth. The president became just a man. The first woman was tended to last. Coyote quit chasing his tail. Raven sang his song of peace. That day, the neighbors thought she had gone mad.
That's the one where it's Bernie. It started Bernie unaccompanied on organ, and Gene was telling the story while Bernie was playing. And yeah, it was awesome, just the way Bernie developed and reacted, and basically put the story that Gene was telling into sound. You know, and just the arc of that story was crazy.
Well,
just watching how Bernie did that.
Yeah, Bernie didn't even know the story. He didn't even know the story. And we just like going, hey, Gene, you know, one of those things, hey, I was like, what do you got?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, well, I've always wanted to use this. And so without even hearing the story or knowing the story, it's like, just okay, just go with it. And then Bernie would try something else, you know, and then even although he was following me, I was also following him. And there were some times too, it's like we'd go into the studio too, and Randall or Preston would say, hey, you know, you're up on this mic, you know, and then Bernie's on that mic, and I have a flute in my hand. Make something, do something, you know, and then we would just go someplace with that.
I love how like the stories build in, and it's, you know, talking about the main character starting to lose their mind, and then Bernie starts playing Manic Depression by Jimi Hendrix, just out of the blue, slid in there just perfectly, just da, 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 da.
She had gone mad.
He called them like cartoon lines, you know. They were like sort of like little snippets of different songs that, you know, he would throw in just to crack people up. You know, it's kind of a jazz thing, an old jazz thing, you know. Yeah. They play like a line.
Well, can you imagine though? I went during that place, but getting into like imagine the whispers that were going into Bernie's, being presented to Bernie. Those whispers that were like that was going on in his unconscious presence of who he was. Those whispers. The thing is, Bernie was so brilliant that he listened to them.
And that's another one I had to learn the organ part for the guitar line. So at that point, I've been transcribing his solos enough that I'm like, okay, I got a little bit of idea where he's gonna go with it at that point. But yeah, man, I love the way Bernie and Gene interface on that song just so seamlessly that you would have thought that it was, arranged in advance and didn't just happen abruptly out of the blue like that. So Blackfish Trap, that was a song. Well, so that was a piece that was Stephen. Oh God, I'm drawing a total blank. Hey Gene, what's Steve from Pamua? What's Blanchett? Stephen Blanchett. I know
exactly. Blanchett, yeah.
Yeah. So Stephen Blanchett from the great group Pamua from up in Alaska. He started working with us on WOOch, came down vocalist, and that was one of those ones where someone was like, "Hey, do you have anything?" And he went out and he told that story, and then after the fact, then when it got to the overdub stage, then Skerik and a great horn player named Hans Tuber who also worked on Heen, him and Skerik came up with the horn arrangement for that piece.
Akatamani. Long ago, far up the small Tundra River, lived two seemingly very different brothers. Both brothers were Nukashbak, great hunters and providers. And both brothers were taught everything by their elders. One brother was mindful of the teaching of his elders, while the other brother became arrogant, boastful, and lazy. He started to forget the teaching of his elders, and soon the luck he had in hunting began to change. One day, a little jungik, a little blackfish, was swimming up this Tundra River when it came across a fish trap. It swam to the surface and poked its head out and saw this house that was falling apart. The land around it was messy and had animal bones strewn all about. The dogs were barking and placed in any old way. It could see that the fish traps and the fish nets were rotting and full of holes. A man, he came walking out of this house with bones, and he threw these bones on the ground, and the dogs, they fought amongst each other for these little scraps. This jungik thought to itself, "This is not a trap that I would swim into." And it swam on. It didn't swim much further when it happened to come across another fish trap. It swam to the surface and poked its head out of the water to see a house that was well maintained. The land around it was clean, and the dogs were placed in neat rows. It could see that the fish traps and the fish nets were freshly made. A man, he came walking out of this house with a pot of fish stew, and he gently ladled the stew into each of the dogs' bowls. This jungik, it saw this and thought to itself, "Now this is a trap that I'd swim into," and it swam inside. The next day, the two brothers went to go check their traps. First, the respectful brother, the mindful brother, checked his trap, and it was full of fish. Thank you for swimming inside. When he went up to his house, he didn't need to remind his wife not to waste anything, to be respectful, because she knew this, and he didn't need to remind his children because They knew this as well. You see, he taught them just as he had been taught by his elders. Now that lazy, arrogant brother, he went to go check his traps. It was completely empty. He threw the trap back into the water and he kicked his way through the barking dogs. And when he went up to his house, his wife complained, "Fix this house, get more wood." And his children complained that they were hungry because the stew they had been eating had been too thin. Now he was tired of all this complaining, but then he remembered he was going hunting with his brother, and for some reason when he went hunting with his brother, they seemed to have good luck. So they rested the leaves into their dog teams and they headed far, far out into the tundra. And late that night, while they were sitting by a fire, that arrogant brother complained how bad the fishing has been, how bad the hunting has been, that even that morning his trap was completely empty. Now his brother explained to him that the hunting has been great, fishing has been wonderful, and that even that morning his trap was completely full of fish. Now that arrogant brother became angry, jealous at his brother's continued good luck in hunting, and he went to bed in a foul, foul, bad mood. And late that night, while the respectful brother lay soundly asleep, that lazy brother, he heard a rustling, and he was startled to see this big, black, glossy eye of a raven staring right at him. And this raven studied him intently, and it spoke. "Do you know why blackfish have not been swimming into your traps? The same reason why caribou have not been stepping in front of your bow, and why seal have not been swimming in front of your spear, and why ptarmigan have not been stepping into your snare. You have become lazy. You have forgotten the teachings of your elders." And the raven, it flew away. And that brother, he hung his head in shame because he knew what the raven told him was right. But then he remembered a time not too long ago when things were much better and they were paddling in a river alongside each other, these two brothers, when they heard a little voice, "Do you want to know how to catch blackfish?" Now they were startled because they were in the middle of nowhere and thought they were all alone. "What's that? Who are you? Where are you?" And that blackfish, that Skerik spoke, "I am right here, down in the water. Look down and you will see me." Now that arrogant brother, he remembered at that time he paddled away saying, "I don't need a blackfish telling me how to catch fish." But this time he bent down to listen, just as his brother did so many years ago. Listen to your elders. They know how to do it. They have been surviving these ways for generation upon generations. Be mindful of their teachings. Just then, that brother, he woke up and said to his brother, "I need to go home. There are so many things I need to take care of before I go on my next hunt." And they did. And he took care of those things that he needed to take care of. And soon the luck he had in hunting began to change. But this time they changed for the better. Danriyama Guimachquijormi. Danriyama Guijormi Loni Talu Yarmi. Uilhurakio, Nuklich Ruten Jolly. Nuklich Ruten Jaknak.
That was one of those spontaneous ones where we just went out and just started playing, just started jamming. And that started off with Stevie Nister, drummer, doing a Tony Allen kind of drum part. And then Bernie laid in first, with a da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then Preston started coming in along with that. I somehow caught what Bernie was doing and started harmonizing it, and it was an instrumental piece all the way with, you know, Skerik doing some sax parts, but then later he went back and he overdubbed a bunch of stuff, and at that point Stephen Blanchett, you know, he was in town to work on the record, and he came up with the vocal parts. So he's doing that in the WOOch language, and also some other vocalists who worked with us, Indriani Ananda and Carly Kainau, they also did some vocals on that. But basically Stephen Blanchett basically being the WOOch James Brown on that piece.
10,000 collective memory. 10,000
Akatamani, Konkuta, Ilagarau, Nunani Mani, Ilagarau, Akatamani Mani, Lunani, Konkuta, Ilagarau, Chakna, Konkuta, Dor, Pitu, Konkuta.
It's really cool to have those moments. And it's just Randall and I just in the salt mines, you know, you just for, you know, like hours, just like, okay, let me overdub another section, you know, let me overdub this part. So you kind of get into this rhythm. What can I add here? Or should I not add anything here? Should it be silence? Should it be rhythmic ideas and notes and harmony? And then you get an idea, improvise over it maybe, and then add some other parts, and you start stacking the horns sometimes, or maybe it's just a single voice idea. But it's just about, you know, giving that section of the song some compositional weight.
I don't know exactly how his part translates, but definitely the theme being, you know, we all have 10,000 generations following behind us, giving us strength. And that was a kind of a phrase that Nahan came up with, you know, 10,000 generations of power. And that phrase kind of started getting echoed around, and Stephen was like, yeah, I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna conceptualize that into my piece right here.
Are you being young?
point, I had one of the hard drives that had all the recordings, like the raw audio on it. And I think by the time we got to WOOch, it was like 100 hours of stuff recorded. It was like an insane amount. And after that, I stopped counting how many hours of stuff from the time that Khu.éex went into the very first session up to when we got to, working on WOOch. It's just, there was just so much. Thank God, it's like digital technology now where you can fit it all like in a, little handheld hard drive. Back in the old days, if it was, tape, it's like that would have been an insane amount. That would have like filled up, a wall for sure. So yeah, it was a lot of stuff.
Well, the thing is that, between the first and the second session that we recorded, it was, we were just kind of clocking the tracks, and they're piling up, and it was getting to be a lot of music. And Randall started to get a little concerned. Like, he was like, I don't know how I'm going to finish all this stuff, because it was all improvised, and oftentimes it was one take. And the fourth session was after we had already learned about Bernie having lung cancer, and yet he had moved to Washington State, and we were all thinking like, oh, this is going to be great, because potentially we could play together live more and do who knows what could have happened. But and then we learned that Bernie got sick, but Judy's called me up and said, I want him to be out there with his friends, and I want him to be, an idle Bernie is bad news. Like, he just, he can't sit here and dwell on, his condition, what he's going through. So I said, well, do you think that he would agree with you, and he agreed that he could come and do another recording session with us, And she said, absolutely, that's what I want him to hang out with his friends and his colleagues, and that's what he, it's going to keep him going, And so he did come down from at that point. He's up in Bellingham area, and so he, we all got together again, and this time we did like a 6-day session, and recorded. And Bernie was up and down. He was like, sometimes he'd go take a nap on the couch, and then he'd wake up like, hey, what's going on? He'd pop up and like, hey, you ready to, do some tracks? Meanwhile, we would have been overdubbing something, maybe percussion or a second guitar part or whatever it was. And so then he got up kind of refreshed, and he'd like sit down and put some more tracks down and stuff. And then, we did, that 6 days resulted in 2 albums worth of material, two triple LPs. It's pretty much most of the Heen album and the most current WOOch album. All of that stuff was done pretty much the last that last session, which would have been in the spring of 2016, like March or something like that.
The Wilderness Within and They Forgot They Survived came out of the same 2 studio session runs. So basically there's those 2 sessions, and then those first 2 records, They Forgot They Survived and Wilderness Within, came out of those. And then Heen and WOOch came out of
bored quick. Used to get used to. And so once I've done something, I'm moving on. And I guess by being born with perfect pitch and being able to hear all types of music, being able to appreciate and be able to play all different genres. Anything different? If it's not the same old thing, cool. It's not the same. I gotta admit it, the camera, so not the same old song. It's the same. So I welcome different, what's the word? Something different. You know, not in one. Just stay jaded, stuck in one place. Or we can go to China now. We can go to Japan, or go to Africa, or Cuba, or this Norwegian, or whatever. You can just limitless, and explore and experiment, and come up with some. Or not necessarily come up with it, but see what you come up with the team, within yourself, and in the players. The team playing just be a playing with you, we're a team playing off each other. Because if it's up to me, I would sit. Well, nowadays, sit down and play until you sat down and play. I couldn't see what he was. Well, he had something in the window.
Do you feel like you're always learning still?
Oh, you never stop learning. If you think that you know it all.
Do you have any sort of advice for young musicians and people trying to get into music?
I don't know what you're getting into nowadays. But I don't think it's worth getting into nowadays unless you put hands on. You have to. I can't say you have to, but I feel that hands on an instrument, hands on whatever instrument you choose. It's like your vocal is within the body. You have to touch something, and besides a button, and think you know it all, because it's nothing. All you do is push the button. Now tell me what chord that is that button pushed. Huh? Oh, tell me, is that the root on the bottom of the note of the chord of the button that you push, or is that the fifth? Or is there a seventh in that chord of the button that you push? Oh, what's the name of the note of the button that you push?
Because a lot of people don't know.
You know, they just push the buttons. Drum beats were not. Okay. So, just try to have some, so you can feel it. You have to feel it. Hit the drum skins, boom, feel the stick, hit that, catch you. Fundamentally speaking, hands-on tweaking.
My name is Clarissa Rizol. My role in this project, I think, is like as a consultant in the sense of some of the traditional songs. I see this, the style, as a way of, yes, keeping the songs alive, but also inspiring the younger generation, our generation, and the younger generation to think outside of the box. That to think in terms of harmony, to think in terms of, harmonizing with the voices, to think in terms of storytelling with music in the background. We used to do that. We used to perform with the music. You'd have the visual, and then you'd have the music and all of that, and the dance. It's just that it's the same thing, really, except it's just slightly different. It's just slightly different beat, different instruments, additional instruments is what it is here. and these guys are having a great time. And I think it's really important to have that cross-cultural exchange, because these guys get to be exposed to a little bit of, you know, the Northwest Coast style drum and music and way of dance and being, and we get to be exposed to incorporating, you know, a different sound, a different, you know, additional beats and all this other stuff. And I think it's inspiring. You cannot help but be inspiring to all the, you know, the next generations of kids and human beings, no matter what culture they come from.
Nuttanatam Akkatamani Unakwani Litakayako Huinga Kalamchigo Umyomahui Imu Mikhbak Hankutamani Nunani Nunakot Nakhmi. Onku da nashu yagu chunaku. Nashu yagmato. Akatama ni mani nunano. Ilakukut. Yuni nanum chini. Nunamani chunaku. Tuluku chaknak. Ngay ata tagwam tota sanit tagluyatut bankoda bischiga khamot wina khwani ilaka ga bankuta yugut tamagmi Yuhugut Spit Atgluten Yugagluten Ciao Yagluten Stu Yuga Papagaluten Hankut Fankuta Kalamchik Kalamchira Yahugut Don Sangut Agunagak Umyama Queen Pukhankuta Mani Nunakut Agunagami Fankuta Nashu Yagnakut Nashu Yaguchunaku Mani Nunakut Ilakakut Yuginina Numchini Puchugnight Ngay takot Huangkuta Yuk Huangkuta Yugukut Nasu Yagut Junaku Nasu Yagut Junaku